Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is from the South, the evening news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start our new edition right now. After a good deal of confusion, a meeting to prepare a dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the opposition has taken place in the Dominican Republic. Talks between the two sides were scheduled to restart on Wednesday, but the Dominican Republic's Foreign Ministry has now confirmed that the dialogue itself will begin on the 1st of December. Later on Wednesday, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro met with former Spanish Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who has led the repeated attempts to open talks with the opposition. Maduro said that dialogue was a part of his commitment to bring peace to his country, but opposition representatives refused to turn up on Wednesday, saying the government hadn't invited the foreign ministers they expected to accompany the talks. However, the opposition has confirmed today that they will be participating in the dialogue. Social movements in the Dominican Republic have expressed their support for the talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The Somos Venezuela movement said that dialogue is the only way to solve the crisis in the country. It also demanded respect for Venezuela's Constituent Assembly and rejected the economic welfare carried out by the right and criticized the interference of the OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that his country supports dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the opposition as the only way to resolve the difficult situation in the country. He was speaking on a visit to Argentina.
A dialogue between the government and the opposition, this idea we accept it and reinforce it completely. There's not another way to resolve this kind of situation. We hope the other countries of the region will confront the destabilizing attacks coming from powerful countries allied to the opposition. These attacks target the deep economic crisis and provokes violence, which is irresponsible and unacceptable.
Our correspondent Reagan Devines joins us now live from Caracas. Hello, Reagan. So, can we talk about the root of the real issue with the opposition as to whether or not they will participate? Isn't that the real problem at the moment?
Well, hi, Sonia. Good evening to our viewers on Tell Us Your English. It seems that after today's meeting in the Dominican Republic with Venezuela's government and the opposition, a meeting that is meant to establish the methodology and technicalities of those dialogues for peace coming on the 1st and 2nd of December, seems to have gone as a success. However, there are still major fractions within the opposition. There are those members who do not support these dialogues for peace. And we've seen most recently with the regional elections, the selection of Venezuela's governors, how this election showed the internal rumblings and chaos within the opposition. So much so that members were kicked out of the MUD coalition. So I guess the question we need to ask right now, ahead of these dialogues for peace, is whether or not members of the opposition are on the same page. Can they agree on the terms and conditions of this agreement that hopefully will soon be signed, maybe by the end of the year? Can they agree on it? And if they do not agree on this, what are the ramifications? Venezuela, the last thing that Venezuelans across the board, the most non-partisan issue here is the violence that has happened in the street. The one thing Venezuela does not want is a repeat of those violent months between April and July of this year. And although the government has been taking major precautions to make sure, or rather to put things in place to deal with such an event, it is a preoccupation that the Venezuela's opposition, the members of which are not on the same page, and whether or not they will approach these dialogues for peace together.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So we've been talking to our Reagan Devines in our Caracas office, giving us that update on the Venezuelan government opposition talks in the Dominican Republic. Other news now, trade unionists, social movements from across Latin America and the Caribbean are gathering in Uruguay for the Continental Meeting for Democracy Against Neoliberalism. The event began with a march through the capital of Montevideo. Some 2,000 participants will discuss how to confront the wave of neoliberal policies and the conservative backlash in the region. The former presidents of Brazil and Uruguay, Lula da Silva and Pepe Mujica, will be taking part. Our correspondent, Jose Sena, was at the summit's opening march and sent this report.
We're here in Montevideo, where the opening march is just setting off from the University of the Republic towards the Montevideo obelisk. This is the first activity of this event for democracy and against neoliberalism, organized by a variety of trade unions from across Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as by social movements. We'll be keeping you up to date on Telesur as the day unfolds.
Thank you so much for that report. Former Brazilian president and current candidate for re-election, Lula da Silva, addressed the social movements attending the Montevideo summit with a message against neoliberalism. Here's what he said.
The progressive governments in the region, in harmony with people's movements, understood how to carry out huge economic, social, and cultural transformations in our continent, creating an unseen dignity for our people. We weren't able to accomplish everything we wanted, nor everything that was necessary, but we pushed forward for the development of everyone and for the integration of Latin America. The old and new phases of neoliberalism require our resistance and response. The same goes for the extreme attacks of the reactionary right against the people's governments of Uruguay, Ecuador, Bolivia, among others. In that case, the workers' and people's movements' proposals become fundamental and absolutely necessary. The fight against neoliberalism, the conservative multinational forces, and their agenda of subordination. The fight against the regression of our recent social victories and for the strengthening of democracy.
More news in a minute, so stay with us. Today is the last day of Chile's election campaign, and the candidates will be holding their closing rallies in the country's main cities. Voter abstention has been a growing trend in recent elections in Chile, and there have been fears that Sunday's vote could set a record for low turnout. Tighter electoral rules and growing political apathy are blamed by some. The former president, Sebastián Piñera, is ahead in the latest polls. Second in the poll, the candidate for the force of the majority party, Alejandro Guilher, talked about inequality in his country just after President Michelle Bachelet announced a new law on public education.
The success of Chile has many phases. Some of them are very positive, but other ones are very negative. And it's because of the tremendous inequality of the wealth in our country. Regardless of the fact that we are the only country in Latin America with the highest gross domestic product per inhabitant, nevertheless, we have the majority of the people on high levels of poverty.
An online forum has been held in Havana to facilitate dialogue between the international scientific community and Cuban experts who are investigating the alleged sonic attacks against U.S. diplomats.
Here are some members of the Cuban team who are carrying out the investigations to explain the supposed sonic incidents which have affected U.S. diplomats in Havana. Yamile Gonzalez, one of the experts, has reassured that they want to cooperate and express interest to exchange information that could help treat those affected.
It's in our interest to treat those patients in case they may have a disease.
During today's discussion between Cuban experts, they shared opinions and information with around 500 people from 10 countries. Many were interested in the scientific community's reaction and how Cuba has worked to clarify these accusations.
Colleagues in the U.S. scientist community. These are not the cause of the symptoms that the U.S. diplomat displayed.
This online debate forum serves as a platform too. Among other things, clarified what is being seen as a sonic attack.
Sound tends to disperse. So what acoustic attack are we talking about?
Since accusations of sonic attacks were made public, the current U.S. administration has politicized the situation, which has reinforced the regression of bilateral relations between both countries, while Cuba has stood by its willingness to have a fair dialogue.
Puerto Rican independence leader Oscar Lopez Rivera has been awarded a second honorary medal while visiting Cuba. This time it was the Asia, Africa and Latin American Solidarity Organization that honored the activists with the support of social organizations and diplomats. This is Lopez Rivera's first visit to Cuba after he spent 36 years in the United States accused of seditious conspiracy.
This is an accomplishment for all of those who have loved justice and freedom and who believe that we can live in a better and fairer world. A world free of empires and wars. A world where justice and love coexist.
59 human rights and victims organizations and 60 social leaders have filed an action to oblige the Congress to implement the peace agreement with the FARC. They want the Congress to finish passing the regulations that would govern the peace jurisdiction, a key part of the peace process.
The implementation of the peace agreement continues to be stuck in Congress. It's just 2 weeks before the fast-track mechanism runs out and only 18% of the legislation has been approved. In this difficult situation, human rights and victims organizations have filed a demand for the Congress and the President to guarantee full implementation of the peace deal.
Peace can be an instrument or a political tool of certain sectors of Colombian society or certain individualist electoral interests. Peace is the right of all citizens, and we have the right and the duty to claim its implementation, and Congress has the obligation to comply to its demands.
The victims of state crimes are also referred to the Constitutional Court's decision to greenlight the special jurisdiction for peace and highlighted its importance in ensuring the political participation of the FARC. Nevertheless, they were concerned about the High Tribunal's decision on third-party involvement in the armed conflict, where the court has determined that these individuals could only attend the jurisdiction voluntarily.
Our concern is whether the ordinary courts will really have the will or really make the effort to ensure that these crimes do not go unpunished. Obviously, they will not go voluntarily to the special jurisdiction because they know that the ordinary courts have so far always guaranteed impunity.
Researchers on the subject say that during the process with paramilitaries, it was established that 15,700 people collaborated in financing, promoting and training or took benefits from the stripping of paramilitary lands, facts that were not investigated by ordinary justice and that now could be left in impunity.
It seems like a radical change, and the Conservative Party could see this as a victory. The exclusion of third parties, I think in the future the Criminal International Court won't tolerate it.
Some public sectors shared the position of the victims and also warned that the court's decision on third parties related to the armed conflict will allow the story to repeat, meaning that civilians that promoted and profited from war won't face justice or history.
Campesino and indigenous groups gathered outside the National Congress in Guatemala, demanding that President Jimmy Morales and 112 deputies resign. We go now to Mario Rosales in Guatemala's capital city for the latest on this protest.
We are outside the National Congress with a march that has come from different places of the capital, straight to the Centro Histórico, asking for the resignation of President Jimmy Morales and also of 112 Congress deputies. Campesino and indigenous organizations have joined the marches around the country. There are groups gathered at 8 spots at least on the main highways of Guatemala, asking for the same. Many academic organizations supported by the Public University of San Carlos are protesting in this location and will be moving later towards the National Palace of the Republic. That is what we can inform about this mobilization.
Mario Rosales with that report. Bolivian activists have occupied the offices of the Defender of the People in La Paz to protest a court ruling limiting the rights granted to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people in 2016 gender identity law. While one group of activists occupied the offices and began a hunger strike, others protested in La Paz's Plaza Murillo to demand their rights. Last week, Bolivia's Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the section of the landmark law that extended marriage and adoption rights to people who change their gender identity. We're going to be back very soon, so stay with us. St. Lucia's Prime Minister says adherence to the Paris Climate Agreement is no longer an option but essential. Prime Minister Chastanet was speaking at COP23, where he said the time for action is now because climate change has the ability to devastate small island states overnight.
There is clear scientific evidence that unless warming is kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius, SIDS will face further intolerable and existential threats. This is why we fought for 1.5 degrees Celsius in the Paris Agreement. Already at 2 degrees Celsius, impacts will be catastrophic.
Dominica was also represented at that climate conference. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit repeated the region's hardline on the need for their high-polluting developed neighbors to do more to reverse the negative effects of climate change.
We know the potential impact of climate change and of countries that may dissipate. How many of the countries that continue to pollute the planet had to suffer a loss of 224% of its GDP this year? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you today that our countries remain under threat. To ensure our very existence, the world must do better.
And as the United Nations climate talks, COP23, are into their penultimate day in the German city of Bonn, environmental campaigners say governments still need to commit to more radical action more quickly to avoid catastrophic climate change.
As the UN climate talks continue in Bonn, delegates from over 200 countries are attempting to find a consensus on ways of bolstering the Paris Climate Pact that aims to end the fossil fuel era this century. The President of Switzerland encouraged the participants to work together to achieve real results.
Our population wants that we end our discussions and find our solutions. So please, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, let's work our teams hard, but let's also tell them discussions must have a solution and a result. Switzerland remains steadfast and remains very ambitious, and I hope that everybody joins us.
World leaders have arrived to join the climate talks. The French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel both condemned U.S. President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Internationally, we need scientific expertise, a scientific debate which is constantly informed, which enlightens our decision-making. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the major actors in this, but today it's under threat from the United States' decision to guarantee its funding. I would therefore like Europe to stand in the place of the Americans. And I want to tell you here that France will not be taking a backseat.
And against this backdrop in the US, a broad alliance made up of numerous states, cities and businesses has formed and put forward a commitment to the American pledge. I would like to warmly welcome this step as it emphasises the support for the climate agreement across large parts of the US regardless of the decision of President Trump to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement.
The conference also heard an emotive speech from a young representative of Fiji, asking the assistants to take action. Fiji was recently declared the most at-risk country in the world from the effects of climate change.
Early in 2016, we were hit by one of the strongest cyclones ever struck Fiji, the strongest in the southern hemisphere. My home, my school, a source of food, water, money was totally destroyed. My life was in chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, speeches and tasks will not solve the problem, but walk the talk is more effective. Let's change our mindset and set a platform in combating this environmental issue for our next generation. We need to prepare ourselves. Safety precaution has to be adopted and followed to keep us safe.
Greenpeace activists crashed the COP23 party, protesting against Germany's use of coal. They sailed around a coal freighter on the Rhine River, carrying banners reading "Action, not hypocrisy" and "Merkel's dirty secret, coal." The Chancellor admitted that Germany still needs to discuss with the companies that use coal to achieve its climate targets.
And here are just some of the other news stories making headlines around the world.
Longtime President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, is holding talks with South African negotiators over his future after the military took control on Wednesday. Envoys from the Southern African Development Community are trying to reach a deal with the 93-year-old leader on the country's future. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, says Mugabe must resign. A group of 6 House Democrats from the left of the party have introduced 5 articles of impeachment against United States President Donald Trump. The articles range from obstruction of justice for interfering in the Russia investigation to making charges of fake news against the media. The move is seen as a symbolic one, with the Representative Stephen Ira Cohen saying that he knows the filing is a long shot in the Republican-controlled House and Senate. France's unions took to the streets of Paris in largely muted protests against President Emmanuel Macron's business-friendly reform agenda. The CGT union, who organized the demonstrations, has struggled to get other unions behind the protests against the labor reform overhaul.
It's not spilling over today, where all the ingredients are there. You only have to look at President Macron's popularity ratings, so perhaps we haven't succeeded in creating conditions where employees can demonstrate en masse. But the reasons to protest are there. If it's not today, it'll be tomorrow. We'll continue on our path because we don't have any other options in the light of the agenda President Macron is trying to force on us.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian says that Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri is free to travel to France. Le Drian made the comments after meeting with Hariri in Saudi Arabia. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun tweeted that he hoped the crisis over the resignation and stay in Saudi Arabia would soon end, with Hariri visiting France. 5 months after the ferocious fire that ripped through the Grenfell Tower apartment block in London, the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that 71 people died. The police said the probe pushed the boundaries of scientific investigation.
Now that search and recovery and identification operation has been very challenging and arduous in so many ways. Our specially trained officers working with experts, forensic archaeologists, forensic anthropologists have by hand been conducting a fingertip search on each and every floor in each and every room of every flat and every communal area within Grenfell Tower.
The Islamic State group is almost completely neutralized in the Middle East after losing 96% of the territories it held in Syria and Iraq over the past 6 months. Talisio witnessed the fighting against Daesh.
This is the first thing we see in Mosul. Hundreds of people stood in lines to get out of the city, the second largest in Iraq and the principal stronghold of the Islamic State group for 3 years.
We are suffering a lot. Our homes are destroyed and we have nowhere to live.
Here Daesh imposed their delirious version of Islam. They even erased the faces from these drawings at a nursery. Every few minutes we can hear the sounds of grenades going off. which leave behind large columns of smoke. Over 2,000 jihadis were trapped in the western area of the city, and from there they would launch indiscriminate attacks, using these tunnels dug through civilians' homes. The Islamic State group has filled the city, Mosul, with tunnels such as this, legitimate works of engineering several meters deep. According to conservative estimates, 268,000 people have died in Iraq since the United States invasion in 2003. But an epidemiologic study multiplies this number by 3. The Islamic State group emerged from Iraq's occupation and fragmentation. It grew strong thanks to the dismantling of the country's army, and ended up becoming a global threat during the Syrian war. On the road we find the perpetrators of the most recent attack. They tried to ram into an army vehicle while carrying explosives aboard a motorcycle. The soldiers posed with the corpses, as if they were hunting trophies. This is a flag from the Islamic State group that Iraq's army just took from the jihadis in this area. They are 1.5 kilometers from here, in that direction. A great number of Special Forces troops from Iraq's army are consolidating in this area, preparing to lead an assault on the airport, a strategic place for the final battle. Iraq's army announced Mosul's liberation on July 8, after 265 days of combat, but no one can guarantee that this means the complete end of the insurgency. 3.5 million Iraqis have been forced to abandon their homes, and 10 million, 1/3 of the entire population, now need help to survive.
With Daesh in Mosul, we were hungry and afraid. Now, here, at least we are safe. But we're still hungry. We need food.
They had the bad luck of being born in a country that's rich in oil, a country that was invaded for justifications that have proven to be false. Since then, Iraq has been going through a long night that so far has lasted 14 years.
And with that Vincent Montagut report, we've come to the end of this evening's news brief. So for details of these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Telesio English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.